Please state your full name and how long you have been living in California.
My name is Lavinia Zanassi, and I have been living in California my entire life, which is 59 years.
What are the cities?
The cities that I've lived in are, I was born in Palo Alto. My family moved to San Francisco, and then we moved on to the peninsula, San Bruno, Millbrae area.
So who would you describe your family to be? Who did you grow up around? Was it an extended family, or is it just your immediate?
I was raised with my immediate family, which was at that point in time my father, my mother, and my brother. But we had quite a bit of an extensive family that lived within, I would say, 15 to 20 miles. That was a group of cousins, grandparents, my maternal grandparents.
Would you say that side of extensive family was due to your culture as an Italian?
Absolutely, absolutely. My parents were immigrants, and so I was a first generation born here at a time when there really was not much cross-cultural awareness, nor was there a significant amount of openness about people and culture and situations that would require the ability to connect with others that may have been raised either in a different environment, different culture, or different language. Mm-hmm.
So is English your first language?
No. Italian was my first language, and much more specifically than that, my parents are from southern Italy, from an island that's called Sicily. So when they came here, they both of my parents, they came separately, but they spoke the dialect of their island, Sicily, and also Italian. But what I noticed throughout my own growing up years is that many immigrants continued speaking not only the language of their country, their native language, but the dialect of their province or of the particular town that they were raised. And so I was brought up speaking primarily Sicilian and also secondarily the official Italian language.
Did you know any other Italians in the area or any other cultures that were considered minorities?
Absolutely, absolutely. All my closest friends. I was in a school that was primarily first generation American born or immigrants themselves. So my best friends were Russians, Latinos, African American students, and there was a small contingency, very small, of Filipinos that I grew up with. Now remember, this was in the 1960s, so it was very different demographically in this particular area, specifically the peninsula. And I would say that the majority of my friends, if not all, and I can think back now, I would say I would have probably 4 that were not students or children of immigrants or of color or of minority that would be considered white. And of those, they were all immigrant children as well.
Because you had a group of close friends that were primarily, could we say, marginalized
Oh, absolutely, races. Absolutely.
Do you think that affected how you felt as an outsider to the rest of the world, or do you think you still felt discriminated against at that time period?
Well, you know, so much of what we evaluate a person on is how they appear to you visually. And I was a very small child. I was considered maybe what you would say petite, but I was significantly shorter than the majority of the children I went to school with. I had an accent when I started school, again, because Italian was my first language. And I interacted most comfortably with children that had the second language, I guess, also, that I felt they knew, they understood. And we had our broken English conversations, and we all were also placed in classes to minimize our accents. And I had a particular, I guess it could be about 2 years worth, where they gave me lessons to stop rolling my R's and to make sure that I would stop at the end of a word and not to add, as Italians tend to, that extra syllable. So I did feel much more comfortable with young children that understood the fact that speaking English was not something that came naturally to us, that our understanding of the world was through the lens of our own immigrant parents, who many times were struggling for work, for acceptance. But to go back to my original point, I may have appeared to be more like someone of the majority, but my actual philosophies, my understanding of the world, even my basic ability to fit in was not certainly of the majority. So I always felt that I didn't fit, even though I could. In some ways people would say, oh, but you look like everyone else. And that added another level of, I think we could say, dysfunction maybe to a childhood. Complication, absolutely. Because I appeared as if I fit in, but I was very much restricted in my own way of comprehending the American way, because that was not what I was being taught.
So, because you mentioned that you happen to look like the majority, and though you hung out with a minority, and that's where you truly felt you fit in.
Yes.
Did you ever come across any particular discrimination for you?
Absolutely. In fact, many times people would say to me, you talk funny and you look kind of different. What are you? And who do you think you are, in some negative ways? And I always felt that to a certain extent I had to almost be like a chameleon. I had to make the effort to feel that I belonged, even though many times in conversations with some of the classmates I would pretend that I got what they were saying, and a lot of times I really didn't. There were a lot of situations where we would have maybe games, or we would have exchanging of lunches. Was really interesting because I was really not familiar with peanut butter and jelly. I didn't even know what bologna was. It sounds crazy, but I would have my Italian food that I'd bring. And back then, it wasn't like it is now where people say, wow, what are you eating? That looks great. I went to this Chinese restaurant. I went to this Indian restaurant. People were, peanut butter and jelly, bologna. Sometimes, interesting, there was a few kids that had just plain, and I'll never forget this, it was so odd to me, mayonnaise sandwiches, nothing else but mayonnaise. And I remember going home and telling my mother that these kids had mayonnaise, and she says, well, that must be something American, because I don't know about that. You usually have to put, mortadella or coppa or salami in the sandwich. So it was just really interesting how I would internalize some of these things and not necessarily share them with anyone later on. I would just say, oh, that's something that I will learn about and I'll be able to fit in. But I did certainly identify with my, I would say, bicultural friends far more. We would use little words. For example, a lot of my Latino friends, they would tell me their Spanish equivalent to my Italian, and then we felt so good that we got it, and we felt, I'm validated by this person. And then go home and be in my Italian world.
So there was a lot of ways where you really were just a chameleon, but you just had to feel like a puzzle piece as a first generation American with highly cultured Italian family and even other friends.